I hope she doesn't notice me. Ethan muttered under his breath as he stumbled through the ice-choked canyon, the wind slicing across his face like frozen knives, snowflakes stinging his cheeks, and hands despite the thermal gloves gripping his gear. The canyon walls towered hundreds of feet above, jagged and slick with layers of alien frost that glinted under the weak light of a distant sun. His suit's sensors beeped sporadically, struggling against interference from the planet's dense mineral atmosphere, giving him an uneasy rhythm that matched his own quickening pulse. Every footfall on the brittle ice sent tiny shudders through the canyon floor, and somewhere above him, a deep, resonant thump made him freeze, eyes darting skyward. The shadows between the cliffs shifted, long and massive, and for a terrifying second Ethan thought the sound belonged to some enormous predator, a carnivore waiting to devour him. His breath fogged in the air as he crouched, scanning for any movement, heart hammering, palms slick with condensation inside the gloves. Then he saw her, Lyra, the giantess of whispered legends, emerging from the haze, her skin shimmering faintly teal under the pale sun, eyes curious and intelligent, hair cascading like liquid silver down her massive shoulders, not threatening, but undeniably immense. Her steps pressed into the ice with surprising gentleness, each movement measured, aware, almost playful, as if she had been observing him with quiet amusement. Ethan's pulse raced, part fear, part fascination, as he realized she had noticed him, her gaze locking on his small, fragile form, and for a moment, the canyon seemed impossibly vast, isolating them both in the alien cold. He shifted slightly, trying to appear non-threatening, raising his hands just enough to show surrender without vulnerability, and muttered a nervous, "I'm not prey." A faint smile touched Lyra's lips, subtle but unmistakable, and the corners of her luminous eyes crinkled in a way that conveyed understanding rather than hunger. Ethan took a cautious step forward, boots crunching over the frozen ground, scanning the environment for shelter, realizing that despite her size, she moved with an elegance that belied any notion of danger. His suit sensors continued their quiet work, noting the atmospheric anomalies and the subtle temperature gradients radiating from her presence, a soft warmth that contrasted with the frigid surroundings, and he allowed himself a brief exhale of relief. Lyra tilted her head slightly, the gesture enormous and graceful, and emitted a low, melodic hum that vibrated through the canyon walls, a sound more curious than threatening. Ethan's mind raced, cataloging every detail, the way the snow clung to her scaled shoulders, the subtle iridescence of her skin, the quiet awareness in her gaze, and he found himself inching closer, propelled by fascination more than courage. The wind howled again, carrying shards of ice that stung like needles, and Ethan stumbled into a shallow alcove, quickly setting down his portable scanner and activating a faint light to illuminate the frost-coated walls. Lyra followed, steps careful, almost playful, and the light glinted off her skin, creating a prism of colors that danced across the canyon. You're not going to eat me," Ethan said, voice trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the massive creature, half expecting a change in her expression that never came. Lyra's gaze softened, and she bent slightly to meet his line of sight, still towering, still immense, and with a delicate tilt of her head, she communicated a quiet patience, a hint that she was assessing him, not hunting. Ethan swallowed, adjusting his grip on the scanner, heart still racing but now tinged with curiosity instead of pure fear, and whispered, "I just need shelter, just a place to stay out of the storm." Lyra's eyes flickered with what he interpreted as amusement, maybe even understanding, and she extended a massive hand a safe distance away, palm open, inviting him to step closer. Ethan hesitated, then slowly moved forward, every nerve alert, aware of the potential danger, but unable to resist the strange sense of connection growing between them, the alien intelligence and his human ingenuity weaving an unspoken dialogue that would mark the beginning of an extraordinary encounter. The alcove provided a fragile sense of shelter from the relentless wind, ice particles bouncing off the walls and scattering like tiny sparks under the faint light Ethan had activated. He glanced at Lyra, who remained motionless, her massive form filling the narrow space, yet somehow managing not to press against the walls. Each exhalation she made created a subtle swirl in the frigid air, carrying a faint warmth that reached him and made him acutely aware of the contrast between her presence and the harsh environment. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart, and adjusted the scanner on his shoulder. Its soft hum mingling with the distant whine of wind echoing through the canyon. Lyra shifted slightly, one enormous foot stepping delicately on the icy floor, leaving impressions deep enough to remind him of her immense weight. Ethan noticed the subtle iridescence in her skin catching the scanner's light, creating a shifting pattern of blues and greens that seemed almost alive. He extended a hand toward the wall, steadying himself as he watched her, noting the small details, the way her eyes blinked deliberately, how her fingers flexed with careful intention, the tiny vibrations of her breathing. He decided to speak, his voice cautious yet carrying a thread of curiosity. "Are you used to this cold?" Lyra tilted her head, the motion smooth and graceful despite her size, and emitted a low, melodic hum that resonated through the alcove, answering more with tone than words. Ethan allowed himself a small smile, realizing that communication could extend beyond speech through observation, patience, and subtle cues. He moved closer to the wall, crouching slightly, not to appear threatening, but to maintain his own balance on the slick surface. "I am trying to find a safe place," he continued, voice steady. "Somewhere I can wait out the storm. I do not want trouble." Lyra regarded him silently, her golden teal eyes scanning every detail of his movements, yet there was no hint of aggression. Ethan could feel the quiet intelligence behind her gaze, the curiosity, and perhaps a measure of judgment. He took another step, carefully placing his boots to avoid loose shards of ice, and noticed how her gaze followed each motion, tracking his position with deliberate precision. The faint warmth radiating from her presence seemed to pulse gently against the cold, reminding him of the precarious balance between fear and fascination. Ethan adjusted his grip on the scanner, watching the ambient light reflect off her scales in subtle patterns that shifted with her movements. He could hear the faint whisper of ice settling in the alcove, a reminder of how still they both needed to be. He muttered softly, almost to himself, "I am not here to hurt you. I only seek shelter, nothing more." Lyra emitted another melodic hum, a low vibration that seemed to acknowledge his words, her eyes narrowing slightly in a gesture he interpreted as thoughtful consideration. Ethan took a tentative step closer to a natural ledge along the wall, placing the scanner down on a stable patch of ice and crouching, careful to remain as unobtrusive as possible. He watched as Lyra lowered herself slightly, her massive arms folding in a way that created a gentle space between them, signaling acceptance without closeness that might be intimidating. The subtle tension in the air began to shift from immediate threat to cautious observation, a mutual awareness that they were coexisting in the alcove, sharing this small portion of the canyon. Ethan's fingers traced lightly over the wall for stability, feeling the icy texture under his gloves, and he glanced at Lyra again, noting the faint flicker of color along her scales, the slight rise and fall of her chest, and the deliberate calm in her eyes. He exhaled slowly, allowing the rhythm of his own breathing to sync with the subtle vibrations of the alcove, the scanner's hum, and the low melodic tones from Lyra. For the first time since entering the canyon, he felt a momentary sense of safety, a fragile connection formed through shared space and unspoken understanding. Each movement, each observation, built the foundation for cautious trust, the storm outside continuing its fury while inside the alcove a silent dialogue began, bridging the vast differences between human and giantess through careful observation, patience, and mutual awareness. The storm outside persisted, snow and ice whipping against the canyon walls with a relentless intensity, but inside the alcove, a fragile quiet had settled. Ethan adjusted his position slightly, crouching low on the icy ledge to get a better angle on the scanner, its soft hum blending with the distant howl of wind outside. Lyra remained still, towering over him, her massive eyes tracking his movements with careful attentiveness, observing the smallest gestures as if deciphering the intentions behind them. He reached for a compact thermal sensor, tapping it gently against the wall to measure the slight warmth radiating from her immense form. Noting how her presence seemed to create a subtle gradient in the frigid air, a faint halo of heat that contrasted sharply with the cold surrounding them. Ethan spoke softly, words intended more for his own focus than communication. I need to understand the environment, and you. And Lyra tilted her head slightly, a soft vibration resonating from her chest that he interpreted as acknowledgement, a quiet curiosity mirroring his own. He traced his gloved fingers along the scanner controls, activating a low-frequency beacon that pulsed with a gentle light, designed to detect hidden fissures or unstable ice within the alcove, all while keeping his movements deliberate and careful not to startle her. The interplay of light across her iridescent scales cast shifting patterns onto the frost-coated walls, painting abstract shapes that moved as she shifted her weight slightly, each subtle motion deliberate and measured. Ethan noted the way her shoulders flexed and her hands curved, the elegance of her movements contrasting with the sheer magnitude of her size, and allowed himself a small exhale, realizing that danger was not imminent, but vigilance remained essential. He adjusted the scanner to a wider sweep, watching as the soft pulses of light revealed small icicles hanging from the ceiling, fragile enough to fall if disturbed, and took a step back to give Lyra ample space, respecting the silent agreement forming between them. The wind outside intensified, forcing snow and ice particles against the alcove's entrance, yet the temperature difference between her radiating warmth and the chill surrounding them made Ethan acutely aware of the delicate balance sustaining their temporary refuge. Lyra lowered herself slightly, shifting weight in a controlled motion that seemed to acknowledge his presence, her gaze softening but remaining alert, the subtle play of her eyes reflecting the shifting light from the scanner, conveying intelligence, observation, and patience. Ethan leaned slightly against the wall, scanning her expression and posture, noting the subtle cues of her mood and reactions, the minute shifts in color and reflection across her skin, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, each detail reinforcing the growing understanding that they were establishing a cautious trust. He adjusted the scanner's readout, marking thermal anomalies and noting patterns in the airflow affected by her massive form, and spoke again. I am not here to intrude, only to survive the storm. And this time, Lyra's response was a soft, low hum that reverberated through the alcove, a gentle vibration that seemed to acknowledge his honesty and intent. Ethan allowed himself a brief, careful step closer to the central floor of the alcove, maintaining balance and a non-threatening posture, and noted how she subtly shifted to create additional space, a silent invitation to coexist without encroaching. The storm outside continued its harsh display, yet within this small, shared space, a tentative connection had formed, each movement, each glance, each measured sound contributing to a silent dialogue of observation, trust, and cautious curiosity that neither human nor giantess had expected, but both were beginning to recognize as the foundation for whatever would come next. The alcove felt marginally warmer now, the faint thermal gradient created by Lyra's presence offering a small reprieve from the relentless chill outside, yet the wind's howl still penetrated the canyon, making the walls shiver and rattle with each gust. Ethan carefully retrieved his portable scanner from the icy ledge, brushing off a layer of frost that had settled during the previous minutes, and activated a secondary sensor to map the alcove more thoroughly, noting small crevices and potential hazards in case they needed to move or adjust positions. Lyra shifted slightly, her enormous frame folding with careful precision, creating a subtle space between her and the canyon wall that Ethan instinctively recognized as a sign of her awareness and adaptability, an unspoken invitation to navigate the shared space cautiously. He spoke softly, voice low and deliberate. I am studying the environment to understand it better and to stay safe. And her head tilted slightly, her eyes reflecting the faint scanner light as if she were analyzing his intent, absorbing each nuance of his movements and tone. Ethan adjusted the scanner's angle, sweeping across the alcove's frost-encrusted walls, capturing data on temperature variations and the subtle interplay of light and shadow cast by the flickering device. The reflection from Lyra's iridescent skin painted dynamic patterns across the walls, blues and greens shifting with each subtle movement, creating a silent, visual dialogue between them. He took a tentative step toward a more open section of the alcove, his boots crunching lightly over ice fragments. careful not to disrupt the delicate balance of snow and frozen debris that had accumulated near the alcove's floor. Lyra's eyes followed his movement, not with hostility but with measured curiosity, and she emitted a low, harmonic hum that resonated gently, a sound that carried a reassuring cadence, bridging the vast gap between her immense size and his own human vulnerability. Ethan crouched further, adjusting his scanning equipment to focus on thermal readings, noting how the warmth emanating from her massive form altered the local environment, creating a subtle current that lifted the edge of his jacket and made him acutely aware of the connection forming through shared space and mutual observation. He exhaled slowly, eyes tracing the contours of her immense figure. The elegance of her movements contrasted sharply with the rugged, jagged surroundings, each motion deliberate and calculated, expressing intelligence and awareness without a word. Lyra shifted again, one hand brushing lightly against a frost-covered rock for balance, the motion deliberate and fluid, signaling a level of comfort with his presence and the environment, a silent negotiation of shared space and coexistence. Ethan noted the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the delicate pulse of warmth through her skin, the way her gaze occasionally flickered toward him and then back to the alcove walls, observing and absorbing data. He activated a small, handheld light to examine a particularly jagged section of the wall, the illumination glinting across her scales and revealing subtle color variations, a living map of biological detail that fascinated him as much as it reassured him of her calm presence. The wind outside intensified, driving shards of ice and snow against the alcove's entrance. Yet within this shared space, a quiet understanding began to form, each movement and observation building a cautious trust. Ethan lowered himself slightly, keeping the scanner stable and unobtrusive, and noted the interplay of shadow and light as Lyra adjusted her stance, the subtle shifts of color and reflection creating a visual rhythm that seemed to communicate patience, attentiveness, and an unspoken acknowledgement of his careful, respectful behavior. The storm's fury remained constant beyond the alcove, yet the microcosm within its walls was beginning to stabilize, a fragile ecosystem of mutual awareness, deliberate movement, and tentative trust, setting the stage for whatever interaction might follow, as both human and giantess continued to navigate the frozen environment with careful observation and silent dialogue. The faint glow from Ethan's scanner illuminated more of the alcove, revealing the intricate patterns of frost that had formed along the walls and ceiling, each crystal reflecting light in a delicate prism that shifted with the slightest movement. He adjusted the scanner again, sending a subtle pulse through the alcove to detect variations in ice density, and noticed how the warmth from Lyra's massive form created a soft gradient that altered the readings, a natural thermal signature that contrasted with the frigid air around them. Lyra shifted slightly, her enormous fingers brushing lightly over a frost-covered ledge, and the sound of ice scraping against rock echoed softly, a gentle reminder of her presence and the careful deliberation in each movement. Ethan took a slow, measured breath, feeling the rhythm of her breathing harmonize with his own, the low hum of her awareness blending with the scanner's soft whir. He moved cautiously toward a more stable section of the alcove floor, keeping his steps deliberate to avoid dislodging loose ice, and noted the subtle interplay of shadows across her iridescent scales, each shimmer conveying depth and vitality in the vast space of the alcove. Lyra's eyes followed him attentively, tracking his movements with an almost imperceptible tilt of her head, signaling curiosity rather than apprehension. Ethan carefully set the scanner down on a small, level patch of ice and crouched beside it, fingers lightly brushing the cold surface as he observed the delicate texture of frost crystals forming along the edges. He spoke softly, voice steady. "The readings are showing pockets of uneven ice. We should remain aware." And Lyra responded with a soft, melodic vibration from her chest, a nonverbal acknowledgement that seemed to confirm her comprehension of his words and the shared intent of careful navigation. He traced a finger along the scanner's display, noting variations in temperature and density, and observed how Lyra's presence subtly influenced the readings, her body radiating warmth that created tiny currents of air, shifting the frost in delicate patterns across the floor. The wind outside continued to batter the alcove entrance, but within, the space felt more controlled, a microcosm of observation and understanding, where human and giantess moved with deliberate awareness of each other's presence. Ethan adjusted his stance, crouching slightly to keep a low profile while maintaining balance on the icy surface, and noted the slight shift in Lyra's posture, her massive arms flexing gently to maintain stability, creating a silent rhythm of movement between them. He activated a secondary sensor briefly, the faint light reflecting off her skin in shimmering blues and teals, and marveled at the intricate biological details, the subtle patterns that seemed to pulse with life under the soft illumination. Lyra remained still, yet every small movement conveyed awareness and thought, her eyes scanning his gestures as he continued to methodically assess the environment, establishing a silent rapport of trust and cautious curiosity. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the tension of the storm outside contrasted with the careful equilibrium they had achieved within the alcove, each motion, glance, and measured sound contributing to an evolving dialogue of presence and observation, bridging the immense difference in scale and physiology between them while creating a tentative but undeniable connection rooted in mutual respect and attentive awareness. The alcove seemed to settle into a quiet rhythm, the storm outside hammering against the canyon walls while inside, Ethan and Lyra moved with careful awareness of one another. He shifted slightly, bringing his scanning equipment closer to the central floor, fingers tracing the edges of the device as he activated a low-light mode, casting soft illumination across the frost-encrusted walls and Lyra's iridescent skin. The colors reflected off her massive form in waves of teal and green, a living mosaic that danced across the ice crystals coating the alcove ceiling. Lyra's eyes followed each motion, the subtle tilt of her head communicating both attention and curiosity, a silent dialogue forming through observation and patience rather than words. Ethan crouched further, mindful of each step, boots crunching lightly on the icy surface, and noted how the warmth radiating from her immense body created gentle currents that shifted snow and frost in delicate, predictable patterns. He spoke softly, careful to maintain a steady tone. "The readings are stable, but I need to map the airflow and temperature gradients more precisely." And she responded with a low, harmonic hum, a vibration that resonated through the alcove, acknowledging his intent and offering a subtle reassurance. Ethan adjusted the sensor angle, sending a delicate pulse across the alcove to detect potential weak points in the ice formations above and below, and observed how her presence altered the results, her thermal signature creating subtle patterns of movement in the readings. The interplay of shadow and reflected light across her scales produced a constantly shifting visual texture, blues, teals, and hints of silver blending as she moved, each shift deliberate and measured, her awareness of the environment clear in every gesture. Ethan took another careful step forward, crouching low to maintain balance, and noted the slight shift in her stance, the flexing of her massive arms, and the positioning of her feet, signaling both awareness and acceptance of his presence in the shared space. He activated a secondary scanner briefly, the soft pulses illuminating the alcove in gentle arcs, and noticed the intricate reflections on her scales as they interacted with the light, a natural display that held both beauty and biological detail. Lyra remained motionless yet alert, her eyes following his adjustments, movements, and gaze, and Ethan felt a sense of cautious trust building, a silent understanding that both were negotiating their coexistence in this small portion of the canyon. The wind outside intensified, driving sheets of snow and ice against the alcove entrance, but inside, the environment remained calm, controlled by their mutual awareness and careful attention. Ethan leaned slightly against a frost-covered wall, observing the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way the soft vibration of her hum seemed to sync with the scanner's pulses, and how each small gesture communicated patience, intelligence, and measured intent. The storm's fury continued unchecked beyond the alcove, yet within, a delicate equilibrium had been established, each movement, glance, and soft sound reinforcing the silent bond of observation, cautious curiosity, and growing trust that was beginning to define their shared experience in the frozen, alien environment. The wind outside roared even louder, sending sheets of snow and tiny shards of ice against the alcove entrance. But inside, a fragile calm had settled, as if the storm itself respected the silent truce forming between Ethan and Lyra. He shifted carefully, testing the stability of the ice beneath his boots and adjusting the scanner to provide a wider sweep of the alcove, noting variations in surface tension and subtle air currents created by Lyra's immense form. Her gaze followed each motion, steady and deliberate, and she tilted her head in a gesture that conveyed both curiosity and attention, the faint harmonic hum vibrating softly through the cavern, mingling with the low hum of the scanner. Ethan crouched lower, hands brushing lightly over the frost-encrusted floor as he examined a cluster of ice crystals, noting how their structure reflected light across Lyra's scales in a shifting pattern of blues and teals. He spoke carefully, voice calm but deliberate. "We might need to find a more secure section if the storm intensifies further." And her eyes flickered in understanding, the subtle shifts in the color along her skin seeming almost responsive to the tone of his words. He took a cautious step forward, boots crunching softly, and noted the intricate interaction of shadows and reflected light, the way her massive form shifted air currents and altered the thermal gradient in a way that created pockets of relative warmth around her. Lyra's posture remained poised and measured, one hand lightly pressing against the icy wall to maintain balance, her attention fixed on him, and for a moment, Ethan felt the enormity of her presence not as a threat, but as a stabilizing force within the alcove. He adjusted the scanner's settings to detect minute fissures in the ice above and below, aware of the subtle vibrations caused by her breathing and the shifting of her weight, and he realized that every observation required patience, precision, and careful attention to avoid disturbing the delicate equilibrium they had established. The ambient light from the device painted her iridescent scales in soft patterns, the colors ebbing and flowing with each minor movement, creating a living mosaic of motion and reflection that captivated him, drawing his focus while reinforcing the sense of cautious trust developing between them. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the rhythm of the alcove settle, and moved toward a slightly higher ledge, keeping his movements measured, each footfall deliberate, each hand placement tested for stability. Lyra shifted again, lowering her massive body slightly to give him additional space, and the subtle vibrations from her hum resonated through the ice, a gentle confirmation of her awareness and acceptance of his presence. He scanned the floor and walls carefully, noting tiny formations of frost and snow that might pose risk, while simultaneously appreciating the intricate textures created by the interplay of light and shadow across the alcove. The storm outside continued unabated, yet within this fragile space, a quiet partnership had emerged, each movement, glance, and measured sound contributing to a silent understanding, a mutual awareness of presence, caution, and respect that bound human and giantess in a shared experience of observation, patience, and the unspoken promise of cooperation as they prepared to endure the storm together. The storm began to wane slightly, the wind still howling but less violently, and the alcove felt more like a sanctuary than a trap. Ethan crouched near the scanner, watching how the light played across the icy surfaces and noticed subtle shifts in Lyra's posture that indicated both alertness and relaxation, a balance that only came with trust. He carefully moved a small emergency thermal blanket closer to the wall, testing its weight and flexibility, and observed how her eyes followed every movement, reflecting the faint light in waves of teal and green. Ethan spoke softly, voice calm and steady. "I am preparing for the night. The temperature will drop further, and I need to ensure stability." And Lyra emitted a low, melodic hum in response, the vibration resonating through the alcove, a nonverbal acknowledgement that seemed to say she understood and approved. He adjusted the scanner to capture wider thermal readings, noting how her immense body created gradients of warmth in the surrounding air, and how these pockets of relative heat affected the frost and ice formations nearby. Each subtle shift in her position changed the pattern of the reflections, casting moving mosaics across the walls that Ethan found both mesmerizing and informative for his mapping of the alcove. He stepped carefully toward a slightly raised ledge, brushing away loose ice fragments, and felt a faint current from her body wash across his face, a reminder of the scale difference between them and the care required in movement. Lyra shifted her weight slightly, one hand brushing against the wall for stability, and Ethan observed the slow, deliberate movement, noting how it maintained the equilibrium of the alcove and allowed him more space to operate safely. He crouched lower, activating a small auxiliary light to check a patch of ice that had formed unevenly, and watched as the gentle illumination danced across her scales, highlighting textures and subtle colorations that shifted with every minor motion. Her eyes tracked his actions, reflecting attentiveness and curiosity, a silent exchange of awareness between them that required no words but communicated understanding and patience. Ethan adjusted his gloves, touching the scanner carefully, and noted the minute changes in thermal and airflow readings caused by her presence, each observation reinforcing the delicate balance of their shared space. He exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of his breathing match the gentle vibrations of her harmonic hum, and allowed himself a moment to appreciate the cooperative dynamic that had developed, the storm outside contrasting with the quiet stability within. Lyra shifted slightly again, creating a safe channel for him to move closer to the central floor of the alcove, and Ethan observed the grace in her movements, the precision in her weight distribution, and the quiet intelligence evident in her gaze. The alcove, once harsh and forbidding, now felt like a shared domain, each step, glance, and measured motion contributing to a fragile, yet growing trust, the storm serving as a distant backdrop to the meticulous, deliberate cooperation between human and giantess, a silent understanding that they would endure the night together, observing, adjusting, and respecting each other's presence in the frozen, alien environment. The storm had finally begun to subside, leaving the canyon in a muted silence, the wind reduced to soft whispers that traced along the icy walls. Ethan stood carefully on the central floor of the alcove, scanning the remaining ice formations and observing Lyra as she adjusted her massive frame with deliberate care, settling into a posture that seemed both relaxed and attentive. The soft glow of his scanner illuminated the frost and the subtle patterns of her iridescent scales, shifting through shades of teal and blue as she exhaled gently, the warm air creating faint currents that swirled around them. He took a slow breath, feeling a rhythm in the quiet vibrations of her hum that seemed almost like a pulse, matching his own steady heartbeat, a silent cadence that underscored the mutual understanding forming between them. Ethan stepped closer, moving cautiously across the uneven floor, and noted how her gaze followed him without alarm, each movement measured and graceful, communicating trust and awareness rather than authority or threat. He bent slightly, adjusting a section of ice to examine its thickness and stability, and watched the reflections of light from the scanner dance across her massive shoulders and the surrounding walls, creating shifting mosaics of color and form that highlighted the alien beauty of the environment and Lyra herself. She shifted again, one hand tracing the wall lightly for balance, and Ethan observed how her presence influenced the microclimate within the alcove, the warmth from her body softening the frost in localized areas and creating small pockets of relatively stable footing. He spoke softly, almost as a confirmation of his own thoughts. "It is calm now. We can move slowly if needed." And her subtle hum responded in a resonant tone, a quiet affirmation of comprehension and agreement, the sound vibrating gently through the alcove. Ethan moved toward a higher ledge, noting the gentle gradient of light across the icy surface and how her position and movements affected the shadows, creating a dynamic pattern that seemed to evolve in response to both their presences. He adjusted the scanner to capture the remaining thermal gradients, observing the subtle variations caused by the interplay of his smaller form and her immense body, and found that each data point reinforced the balance they had established, a combination of caution, patience, and mutual respect. Lyra remained still, yet her eyes tracked every motion, conveying curiosity, awareness, and a measured acknowledgement of his care and attention. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the tension of the storm outside fade into the background, replaced by a quiet connection built on observation and cautious cooperation. He stepped carefully along the ledge, scanning the alcove walls and floor one last time, and felt a profound sense of relief mixed with awe at the silent partnership that had emerged, a fragile bond between human and giantess, grounded in respect, trust, and shared endurance of the harsh, frozen environment. The alcove, once a place of potential danger and uncertainty, had become a space of understanding and tentative companionship, each movement, glance, and vibration contributing to a silent acknowledgement of coexistence, a shared recognition of presence, and the quiet promise of continued collaboration as they prepared to leave the sanctuary together once the storm had fully passed.